Hey guys, this is Brad Jackson coming to you live from the Jackson Ampworks factory here in Keller, Texas. And we're starting our new video of the week blog, and this week's blog features the Jackson Ampworks Atlantic, which we just released in March of this year. Today we'll be doing just a quick verbal overview of the features found in the Atlantic, and we hope you enjoy. So this is the front panel of the Atlantic, and as you see, it has a lot of similarities to the front panel of the Britain, being the same size and having 6 knobs, but that's really where the similarities end. The Atlantic, unlike the Britain, is a single channel, non-master volume type amp that is really actually a pretty high gain amp considering there's no master volume. So if you look from left to right, starting off with the input jacks, these are what's known as high-low input jacks, meaning that the high input has more gain available to you, the low input has less gain. So this is really handy for guitars like Strats or Tellies or guitars with single coils that you can plug into the high input and get a bit more boost out of it. If you have a guitar like a Les Paul or a 335 and you want to try to get a pretty good amount of clean headroom, try plugging into the lower input, and that'll pad the signal down about 6 dB. Moving on from there, volume control, this is really everything for the Atlantic. It's both your master volume and it's your gain control, it's everything. So you really just set the volume control where you want your gain to be, and you can modulate that amount of gain pretty well with the volume control in your guitar. Moving on from there, here's a new control you probably haven't seen before. We call it the edge control. All the way up, the edge control is totally out of the circuit, and what the edge control does is it acts as a master tone for the entire amp. Once you set the EQ, using your treble mid bass controls, you can adjust the high end response of the amp with the edge control and either smooth it out a little bit by rolling it back or brighten it up a bit more by rolling it forward. Moving on, the treble mid bass controls, pretty standard stuff. Each one affects its own respective frequencies. Obviously turning it up more gives you more of each frequency. The presence control, you've seen this before, it's a typical Marshall type thing where it just affects the amount of presence the sound has. It sounds either closer to you or further away from you. New features for the Atlantic that you probably haven't seen before, on our amps at least, the bright switch works in conjunction with the volume control. If you bring the bright switch in, the high end increases quite a bit. This effect is diminished and lessened the more you turn up the volume control, but still it's pretty effective from here all the way down. It'll really help to brighten the sound up if you're playing at low volumes. The next switch we have is what I call the single coil humbucker switch. In the single coil position, it thins the sound of your tone out a bit as if you're playing something like a Telly or a Strat. And if you flip it over to humbucker mode, it can take something like, again, a Strat or a Telly and pretty closely emulate the sound of a guitar with humbuckers. It'll really fatten up the lows and the mids and just bring quite a bit of girth to the sound. From there we have what's called the thin thick switch. It's somewhat like the single coil humbucker switch, but it thins it out and thickens it up in a different section of the amp, so it has a different result to it. I really encourage you to experiment with it, try to find your own unique sound with this one, because it's very flexible and very useful to have. Moving on, low gain, high gain switch. Don't confuse this with like a really huge boost or anything. What it really does for you is it adds a bit of push to the tone when you're in a cleaner setting. So if you're about, from here on down in the volume control, this switch right here really just makes it sound like a really pushed Fender or a really pushed Marshall type tone. From here on up on the volume control, this switch does less and less, but still a very cool switch, adds a lot of tonal options, especially when doing clean passages. And finally, the presence control has an on and off switch. We're really, really excited about this switch. It offers a lot of tonal options that you don't normally see on amplifiers. In the on position, the presence control is active like you would normally see on something like a Marshall type amp, but when you switch it off, it totally disengages this control along with the negative feedback in the amplifier. So what happens is your gain goes up substantially, and the bottom end of the amp, as far as the tone, loosens up quite a bit and becomes much more raucous and much more fun. So play with that. There's a lot of tonal options to have there. Okay, on the back panel of the Atlantic, reading from left to right again, some of the features we have are, very importantly, is a voltage selector that gives you 110 volt operation or 220 volt operation. This is very handy for guys that travel a lot, that travel internationally. We're one of the few manufacturers that actually gives you an easy to move switch that lets you rewire the amp internally on the fly. So you don't have to carry transformers with you or step down, step up transformers when you're touring. Just take your guitar pick, stick it in there, flip the switch, you're back in business, and you can't hurt the amp. Also in this little module we have a fuse. It's just your mains fuse for the amp. In this little compartment here there's a fuse. It's the active fuse. There's also a spare one too, so if for some reason the amp does go down below fuse, you got a spare built into the amp. Standard IEC type computer cable here. You can find those anywhere, no matter where you are, you'll be able to find a cable for this thing. Let's see, next moving on, we have the bias trim system here. It's a pretty nice little system. It's small, compact, and does a great job. Basically what you do is you take a multimeter, plug your positive into this red one, plug your negative lead into the black one, and what it lets you do is bias the amp when the amp is in 50 watt mode. And we include a nice locking pot right here that once you get the amp set at the current, the right current, which is about 35 millivolts measured on your multimeter, once you get the tube set there to about 35, lock it in with the locking pot, you're back in business, and it won't vibrate loose when you're traveling. Moving on, power switch, pretty standard stuff. Standby switch, again, pretty standard stuff. Where it gets really interesting is our 3-mode power section here. We are the only manufacturer in the world that offers 3 power modes that are switchable on the fly like this. From left to right, we have 12 watts Class A. In this mode, you're using 2 6v6s in Class A push-pull arrangement, cathode biased, really great spongy type tone, really great for lower volumes and that kind of stuff. When you want to make a little bit more volume, have a bit more headroom, a little bit more punch, flip it up to 25 watts. When you do that, you're using 2 EL34s, again, Class A, cathode biased. Finally, if you find you need more headroom, more volume, more punch, take the amp up to 50 watts. This is where it's really cool because the amp then goes high voltage, Class AB operation, fixed bias. So you have a ton of headroom, ton of volume, a lot of punch. It's just like a totally different amp altogether. Moving on, we have a 4, 8, and 16 ohm selector that feeds the output, the speaker outputs here. 2 outputs in parallel. You can hook up a couple cabinets to it, no problem whatsoever. Any cabinet you find, 4, 8, or 16 ohms, you can use it just fine. Effects loop, because the amp is single channel, it's a common just send and return. Send here, it's about a 1 meg ohm impedance on the send, and likewise 1 meg impedance on the return. Just a simple post preamp effects loop. Finally, we have a boost foot switch. The boost foot switch, what that does is it bumps up the preamp gain available in the Atlantic, works as a great solo boost, and just takes the amp from clean to just over the top overdrive with nothing more than a click of the foot switch, and it's very silent, no pops, no buzzes, no nothing like that. Just a great feature. You may find that you stop carrying overdrive pedals to your gigs because you won't need them anymore. So that's the Jackson Ampworks Atlantic. Check our website for our dealers where you can try one out yourself, and check out the blog next week where we'll be having videos and sound samples of the Atlantic and demonstrating all the features we showed today. Thanks.